Hello, this video discusses article reviews, what they are, when they're due, and they're due at the time of your choosing, so to speak, and why we do them. So first, what is an article review? An article review requires you to read 2 additional articles that I need to approve. These articles must be, as listed in the syllabus, quantitative, they must be empirical, so these are not case studies, there has to be statistics used in them, and I have to approve them. They do not have to come from the reading lists or the recommended reading lists, and they don't have to be tied to course material. What I want you to do, or prefer you to do, is select articles that will help inform your policy memo. So remember, in your policy memo, you must have 3 empirical articles to support your policy position. 2 of them can be these articles, and I think that helps double up on the work. These are worth 40 points. This is one of the few areas where I teach where the reward and the work expected do not align. So there's a tremendous amount of work in pedagogical research on how to design assignments and balance them to ensure the work that you put in is worth the credit that you receive. And we do this naturally in a marketplace based on compensation, but in academic settings, there's no pay for that, so we want to make sure that the points align. I'm telling you now, this assignment is not one of those. The rest of the course is designed that way. This is not. These are worth 40 points, but the amount of work that you need to put into them is considerably more. Why do I do this? I do this because it is essential that we learn skills to interpret and engage dense texts with levels of unfamiliar terms, unfamiliar statistics, other things that we may not fully grab, but that we engage them. But I don't want to have any kind of penalty or mindset that, oh, what if I don't get this article, or what if I struggle with it? Well, it's 80 points out of 1,000 total in the semester. So you need to do it, and you need to do it well, but it's a learning process. The other main reason that I do this is a skill set that, regardless of what you study, is applicable outside of academia. What I want you to be able to do is become familiar with how academic articles are written, how they're structured, because there's a formula, and then be able to quickly move through them. So as you'll notice, maybe not in the 5-week time, but certainly after this class, you can move through academic articles at a much higher speed than you can before. These article reviews and the rubric that's online, as well as the next slide that breaks down the components, helps you identify the key aspects of an academic article. Because listen, you don't have to read everything. Can't believe I'm saying that on camera, but it's true. You want to be able to find the high points. Now, that's a skill, and it's a skill that takes a lot of time. Now, that doesn't mean just skip sections you don't understand or skip huge areas. No. What it does say is, as you become more familiar with what you're studying in particular, you'll see how a literature review is designed. You'll see where the key aspect of the articles are identified. That's what article reviews are designed to do. So there is an imbalance in terms of the work expected and the outcomes, but it's worth it. It's worth it. Okay, so how do you write these things? The rubric that's online identifies the key aspects. Oh, and I should flip that order, but question, problem. So what is the question? What's the research question? Oftentimes you'll identify this with the question mark. I'm guilty of not using question marks in stating my research question in a couple of my publications, but for the most part, there's a question. Next is the literature review. What is a literature review? This is the part where we say, in science, so I get kind of irritated when we see this all over the news. In science, you don't just go on an island very often and conduct experiments or conduct statistical analysis to try to find something. You build it based on knowledge that we already have. And so we think about something like COVID-19. The amount of research on COVID-19, if you listen to the people in the field, is astronomical, to the point that you can't keep up. There's no way you can read all the studies that are coming out trying to understand COVID-19. But what you can do is the literature review. What do we know about coronaviruses before COVID-19? What do we know about Mars? What do we know about SARS? How do they influence our understanding of COVID-19, and how are they potentially different? When we do that in political science context, you'll see this particularly with the use of force, which is the model that we use in this class to kind of identify how we epistemologically expand our understanding of a phenomenon. That's a literature review. So you don't get to say, well, the president uses force. Today, I think it's based on number of golf courses in the United States. Is there anything in the literature that says that? No, it's about unemployment. It's about threats. It's about the environment. It's inflation. There's all these other factors that we know about. What you do in the literature review section is identify the key pieces of literature. Let me rephrase that. You need to be able to condense the literature review section in an article, and you'll typically notice it because it will say literature review, into a paragraph. You need to pull the 5, 6, or 7, or sometimes 1, but usually more than that, key pieces of literature. And you may ask, how do I know what key pieces of literature are? I'll help you with that. Some of it are identifiers in the article. Did the author clump a bunch of citations together? Or did they take time to expand one argument? One argument or one article. If they took a whole paragraph in a paper, that is a good indicator that for this piece, it's a really important piece of the literature. Okay? There's other ways to do this with Google Scholar, citations. There's artificial intelligence that can help. Actually, there's a search engine that will use that to review literature. What I need you to be able to do is start to identify what's important and what's not. Next is a theoretical argument. Oftentimes, the theoretical argument can be stated in the abstract. It's very straightforward. So read the abstract of the article and you'll find the 2 or 3 sentences, the absolute most boiled down component of what the article is. You need to expand on that. Okay? So make sure you have that part down, but condense the 6 or 7 pages of theoretical argument into a paragraph or 2. If we take one of my articles that I'm forcing you to read, usually I let you have a choice. I don't force you to read my stuff, but I don't know actually how to do that in a 5-week course effectively, and it is becoming part of the literature, so you're forced to read it. Okay, in that article, basically I say contracts shape how companies behave. I know, shocking, right? You're like, oh my goodness, are you they let you publish that? Yes, they do. And the reason why they let you publish that is because I put it in a new context, and there's a lot more nuance in the article than just contract shape behavior. Yeah, but the takeaway point is that you need to be able to identify the theoretical argument for that. Next, identify the expected relationship or hypothesis. In this section, literally cut and paste it. Put like page number from where you got it, but you're not plagiarizing their hypothesis. You can't do this. You have to rewrite everything else in there. But a hypothesis is typically already boiled down, right? The author has stated it as clearly and concisely as possible. There's no way around it. Next, research, design, and evidence. Here you need to identify the key dependent variable, explanatory variable, the sample, the estimator, and controls. Okay, so in the science article or science lecture, I detail all of those aspects. So if you're unsure what those are, go back to that lecture or listen to that lecture and you'll experience it. The only other component that's not really mentioned in that article is the estimator. And what I mean by that is I want you, even if you don't know what it means, and that's okay, to identify how the model is estimated. And there will be a sentence in the research design where, and the unit of analysis, which I'll talk about in a minute, where it says estimated using ordinary least squares or negative binomial regression. And you may say, well, why do I need to identify it if I don't know what it is or I can't solve it? This is the part of identifying dense texts. I'm here to help guide you and walk you through what some of these components mean, and then also rest assured that whatever I assign is good science, or is science that we can criticize, I do that too, because of the method. Okay, so the final component that you need to identify in this is the unit of analysis. So I'll say that phrase frequently. And what a unit of analysis is in social science is it has two dimensions. It has time and unit, right? So we think about the spatial temporal, there we go, spatial temporal components. I'm 10 minutes in, I'm not recording that again. Spatial temporal aspect. So what I mean by temporal is time. How it's a time series, so it starts in 1980 and goes to 2000, or it goes from 95 to 2015. And there's a temporal component, or a spatial component, I mean. Unit. It covers usually countries or congressional districts or leaders can be it. So there's a spatial and a temporal component. You have to identify that. Next, you have to discuss the tables. So there's some confusion here. And what I mean by this is we're going to be engaging statistical results. And I'll reiterate this several times in this class. You don't have to be an expert in statistics. You don't even have to be familiar with them. You need to be able to answer 3 questions. 3. First, is it statistically significant? Is the relationship that the author is arguing between the explanatory variable and the dependent variable statistically significant? How can you identify that? Well, scientists are lazy and we've gotten really sloppy in how we conduct science. And so we do this basically solely based on the standard error divided by the coefficient. If it fits a z-score, it becomes statistically significant at, say, a 95% confidence interval. And what that means is in classical statistics, you have a 95% chance that this is not produced randomly. Okay. Well, how do you identify that? That's a bunch of jargon. There'll be an asterisk next to the coefficient. If it's got asterisks, it's statistically significant. If it doesn't, you don't. Second question that you need to answer is, what direction is it in? So you establish that there's a relationship. Is it positive or negative? Does more of the explanatory variable cause the dependent variable to go up or go down? How do you know that? Does it have a negative sign next to it? That's it. Seriously. And the third question that you need to answer is, what's the substantive effect? This one's a little bit more difficult because you can't look at a statistics table, typically, unless it's OLS, and get a sense of what the substantive effect is. But thankfully, anything published after 2000 will have a sentence or multiple sentences or pages of how to interpret the statistics. What you need to go find is, and there will be sentences that say that, the substantive effect of the explanatory variable on the dependent variable. Go find the sentences that say something like, a standard deviation increase in the level of unemployment increases the likelihood of the use of force by the President of the United States by 20%. Go find that sentence. Put that into your article review. That's the substantive effect. That's the take-home effect, right? That's what we actually care about here. Right? The tables and the substantive effects are kind of joint, they're connected. They're things that you need to engage. You do not need to discuss every model in the table. You do not necessarily even have to discuss all of the control variables in a table. You will need a sentence that may say the control variables were consistent with previous scholarly efforts or previous studies, or the controls were consistent across models. Okay? Because remember, the reason why we're reading the particular article we are is because of the key explanatory variables or what they're adding. So we want to focus most of our attention on that. Now, in science, in good science, if you're finding incredible results, but that the control variables or things that we know should affect the dependent variable aren't, or the inverse of that relationship, that raises red flags. And that's where being a scientist is more beneficial. I'm not expecting you to do that. Don't go looking at another article. You can do everything that you need to for this assignment based on the one article. In terms of the reporting of material and engagement. Finally, and most importantly, in my opinion, and since I'm grading it, it's my opinion that matters, what's the theoretical extension? Okay, each one of you has insights and knowledge and background and capacity to be critical and apply it to an article. Okay, so this is one of the differences between, say, policy, security policy, and political science. We don't want to just try to get the answer to the question that we started with. We want to extend it. We want to understand it deeper, or its connection with other things. So the theoretical extension, and this is just putting it out there, this is usually where students, if you don't put in the time, struggle the most. Because I'm asking you to criticize exceptional scholarship, right? So we don't read really anything except my own work that isn't top-notch. Well, I'm still asking you to be critical of it. Where is it weak? What is it? Where is it not connecting? Where does it not pay enough attention to the literature? Are there other factors that the authors don't consider? Okay, so it's not, a theoretical critique is not saying, oh, well, this article stops using data in 2000 and it's different now. Well, the article was probably published in 2003 or 4, so they used what they could. That's not what I mean. What I mean is being able to say, okay, so if we go back to the article that I referenced earlier about contract structures, there's 3 contract structures. Maybe you are a marketing expert and you say, well, maybe there's a selection effect that companies are really only going to be competing for this, and while the author talks about it in the article, there's not enough consideration. How do I extend that? This is demanding, but this is also what we do, right? It's very important to me that when you finish my classes, that you have a strong sense of what political scientists do and what our utility is, right? Because sometimes, especially at conferences, or you'll run into political scientists and all academics who really think that what they do is just earth-shattering important. And in some cases, it absolutely is. In some cases, I would argue, it's not. Okay. One thing that we do in political science that's incredibly useful and important for society are these theoretical extensions, saying how can we better understand social, political, cultural phenomenon and gain empirical leverage to answering those questions. That's what we do. Now, I know this was super long-winded, but if you don't get the sense of it, I described the major paper in like 3 minutes because it's straightforward. See, spot, run, do it. Article reviews, if you spend the time and you do them well, will help you in this class, and more importantly, will help you in every class you take until you graduate in political science and beyond in your career, because we're going to have to engage dense texts. This helps you accomplish that. All right. Thanks.